We're here at the Munich Security Conference, where transatlantic relations and ending the Ukraine war have been the primary focus. But we want to get the view from the other superpower in the world, China. And we're going to speak with Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, who's a former member of the Chinese military. He's now an analyst at Tsinghua University. He's a regular at the Munich Security Conference. Zhou Bo, thanks for speaking to DW. We've seen what's been going on these last few days in Munich. The Trump administration is pushing a new idea of bringing about peace in Ukraine. Donald Trump wants talks with Vladimir Putin. Does the PRC, does China welcome this? Do you see Trump potentially as a peacemaker?
I think any ideas about peace in Ukraine is welcomed in China. In fact, Donald Trump himself has asked China to help. This is interesting for me to observe as a Chinese, because he previously talked about how he could resolve this issue within 24 hours. Of course, that is a kind of rhetoric during election. But the fact that he asked China to help really demonstrates that China might have a role in the war in Ukraine. I believe China's role, first of all, is in joining other major powers in providing kind of a collective security guarantee to Ukraine and even to Russia. Why? Because this kind of a collective security guarantee is often talked about by President Zelensky, and is also deep in the memory of all Ukrainians when Ukraine decided to relinquish nuclear weapons in 1990s. So this is what they remember. So yes, we don't know how long the war will last, except that the war will last for a while, but no war will last forever. So there definitely will be a time when people will discuss how to have a ceasefire. Then the question, as raised by Ukrainians from time to time, is who is going to guarantee this ceasefire? So I think at this time, China can join other major powers in providing this kind of a collective security guarantee. The second possible assistance from China is that if people have so decided, I mean the warring countries have decided to have peacekeeping operations, then I believe China and countries like China, India might be the best troop contributing countries in that for Europeans to do this, as proposed by Polish Prime Minister, as proposed by French President, would not be realistic, in that Russia definitely would take it as another way of a NATO presence in Ukraine. The third possible assistance is the post-war reconstruction. China's capability in infrastructure is next to none, so I don't need to elaborate on that. I think this is just self-evident. China can just do it more quickly and do it more efficiently at a lower cost.
You mentioned NATO. The Trump administration has sort of indicated, although there's some confusion about this, but indicated that it might take the idea of Ukraine joining NATO eventually off the table. Do you think that's a good thing to remove that? Because China's generally been pretty critical of NATO expansion.
We in China really consider that this war has something to do with NATO expansion. Because yes, people talking about the war, talking about this kind of invasion by Russia against Ukraine, but people forgot that actually starting from Mikhail Gorbachev down to Boris Yeltsin, down to President Putin, that means from Soviet time to Russia today, Soviet and Russian leaders have been warning about this kind of expansion. Russia, yes, is concerned with sphere of influence. Sphere of influence basically is a dirty word. It cannot be put on the table. But if Russia would like to fight for safeguarding its sphere of influence, then there is a sphere of influence. We cannot change Russia's mentality, but this is reality. What happened in the war? So I believe NATO really has a lot to do with this war. Then about the future of NATO. The question is, with Western democracy going down, would NATO become really stronger? Probably people say that the membership of Finland and Sweden may be approved of NATO's growing strength. I don't think so. I used to say that NATO is a zombie that is still walking. Why? Because this kind of military alliance, all military alliances live on threat. They're just like leeches sucking blood. So they have to find enemies.
Yes, but isn't it true that the threat is Russia? I mean, Russia invaded Ukraine. Ukraine has the right to make its own choices. Why does Russia have a right to decide what Ukraine wants to do?
You see, but even before the war, I'm not just trying to defend Russia, but it's true that even before this war, NATO has taken Russia as a threat. Because after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the future of NATO is not that certain. But for NATO to survive, they have to find a kind of threat. And who can be the threat? In the old days, it is Soviet Union, and nowadays, of course, it is Russia. So I believe that this kind of military alliance actually would not strengthen even Western democracy. On the contrary, it actually invites the war. So the fundamental question about security in Europe is that NATO has to coexist with Russia, like it or not, because Russia cannot be wished away. So the security of Europe is essentially how they can coexist. People have to think about that. You just cannot look at the fact, a few simple events.
So let's fast forward to now. So that's part of the history, certainly the Chinese view of it. This conference has been dominated, really, the discussions around these halls by conversations about this speech by JD Vance, the US Vice President, in which he criticized European democracy, particularly German democracy. Many see this as an opportunity for China to improve relations with Europe, which is reeling from this criticism. Do you see that opportunity taking shape?
I think definitely Europe will think about what Vance said and what they are going to do next. In fact, according to Financial Times, this kind of inching together between China and the EU is already happening, because this is what I read from Gideon Rockman's opinion, in which he quoted a European official saying, "Believe me, this is already happening." So I think this conference will tell how Europeans would actually become disappointed with the JD Vance speech. Because even as a Chinese, I was surprised. I thought because people's concern here is primarily Ukraine, therefore he will talk a lot about Ukraine. And then, because the United States is in so-called strategic competition with China, therefore he will talk about U.S.-China competition. But he has not talked about all this at all. Instead, he's talking about something that surprised Europeans and angered them. So this is interesting.
So does it feel like a gift to the Chinese delegation?
I think this is not what we have created, but as a result, I think the Europeans will feel that they have to strike a balance, because this is what is already happening. Because even von der Leyen talked about having new agreement with China. So even before this conference, so the European leaders has said something, and it's always in China's interest to have good relationship with Europe. Because for China, this war actually is somewhat unfair for China, in that China is not involved in this war, China is not informed about this war, but because of this war, China's relationship with European capitals have become sour, and this is not in our interest.
But of course, European capitals, the reason that the relations have been soured is that European capitals are very frustrated by the economic and diplomatic backing that the Chinese have been providing for Russia. But I just want to touch on another thing relating to this new administration. Donald Trump's been talking about wanting to take over Greenland, talking about Canada becoming the 51st state of the United States. This seems to reflect a kind of, some people call it a neo-imperialism, or at least an idea that, wanting to add territory to the United States. What's your take on that?
Well, actually, this surprised me, as it surprised everybody. Nobody has anticipated that he would talk about this kind of gains here and there, so it is really surprising. What I'm thinking actually is not what he's going to next. I don't know, but I believe he will continue to surprise people. What I'm thinking is at the end of his second term, Americans' image probably will go down further. Yeah, because if all people concluded that the United States does not want to shoulder any international responsibility, and apart from that, they want to grab land here and there. So what is the moral high ground of the United States?
I mean, some point to that and worry that if Trump is sending these signals, it might suggest that he wouldn't mind, for instance, if China made moves to take control of Taiwan. From a Chinese point of view, do you think that is some sort of encouragement that Trump might not stand in the way of, as you would see it, of the reunification of Taiwan with the People's Republic of China?
Well, people certainly put a lot of reference to China's intention on Taiwan, be it war Ukraine or be it remarks of Donald Trump. But I believe the Chinese government has been consistent to insist that we still would wish to have a peaceful reunification. So we only would use non-peaceful means in three conditions that are well documented in China's anti-secession law. So I believe Trump's remarks would not really have anything to do with China. And how could we resolve this billion-dollar question about maintaining peace in Taiwan Strait? My personal answer is very simple. We have to let China believe that peaceful reunification is still possible. Because one of the last conditions for China to use non-peaceful means is that when China concludes that all possibilities for peaceful reunification are exhausted. So for the rest of the world, it's extremely important to assure China that there are still opportunities for peaceful reunification. So war across the strait is not inevitable.
Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, has been saying that one of the motivations for the US to pull back within Europe is that it needs to reassign forces to the Asia Pacific to face what he describes as the threat from China. What's your perspective on that?
I don't worry about that at all, because just imagine the United States could refocus on Indo-Pacific. So who can help the United States? Because the Biden administration has placed unprecedented, importance to allies, right? So Trump said America first, but for Biden, probably it's allies first. But in a war, in a hypothetical war with China, who can really help the United States? Japan is on top of the list, but according to public opinion poll, there are just about 11% of people who support a direct confrontation with China. And then it goes down to Australia. Australia, yes, would buy 8 nuclear-powered submarines from the United States and Britain, but the current Australian government has made it quite clear that they would not be involved in conflict in Taiwan Strait. And then come to South Korea. South Korea would worry more about, Korean Peninsula. And on that, they definitely need support from Chinese government. And then the Philippines. The Philippines has provided 9 military bases that are just on the first chain of violence. That would have a tremendous military value for the United States. But even the Filipinos are not stupid, because they have laid down conditions for the United States to use these bases. They just cannot store weapons there. They couldn't just launch attacks from there. So until this moment, still, this is the policy. So no one's stupid. I don't believe that in a war between China and the U.S. in the Western Pacific, it is a sure thing that the United States can win. Actually, according to American think tanks, in most of the war games, the United States has actually lost to China.
So, one of the questions the Americans are asking themselves is, why is China building up its nuclear arsenal so rapidly? The fear is that it might be to serve as a backstop for the kind of war that could potentially emerge between the two superpowers at some point in the future. Why is China expanding its nuclear forces so fast? And will the Chinese be open to suggestions from Donald Trump, which he's been floating as well, that he would like to talk with the Chinese and with Vladimir Putin about arms control?
First of all, China is not really building its nuclear arsenal that fast, because 90% of the nuclear arsenal around the world still belong to two countries. Russia and the United States.
It's still far behind, but it is still rapidly accelerating.
Yeah, but China do have good reasons, to increase its nuclear arsenals. Why? Because first of all, you should modernize your weaponries and equipment as it happened to all kinds of weapons. So it does not mean that you can always do the maintenance work. I will give you an example. How do I feel personally about the war in Ukraine? Why NATO would not send any soldiers to fight against the Russians? I think Russia's nuclear deterrence has really played a critical role. Then I have to compare Russia with China. The United States doesn't seem to care that much be involved in a direct conflict with China as it would worry in a direct conflict with Russia. Why is that? Isn't it just because Russia has more nuclear weapons? China has more aircraft carriers than Russia. China's military is bigger than Russian military. And China's military budget is 3 times bigger than the Russian military. So why the United States seems to be less afraid of China? So I ask myself this question. Is it because that China has just a nuclear arsenal that is less than one-tenth of that of the United States? If that is the case, what we need is what? We need a political decision. Yeah, because China has a strong industry. China has a technical know-how, and as has been demonstrated in our ICBM launch, just several months ago, that our missiles are quite all right. So the only question for us is to increase the number or not. And some Americans actually have talked about using nuclear weapons against the Chinese in a conflict in Taiwan Strait. That is really, really alarming. And why would they say that? They say that because they feel that they actually have lost that advantage in a conventional warfare with China in Taiwan Strait. So they are just advocating using nuclear weapons against China.
So, Zhou Bo, we're going to have to end it there, but this is a conversation that I would love to continue with you because I think nuclear arms control is definitely going to be one of the hottest issues this year and heading into next year. But for now, from Munich, Zhou Bo, thank you very much for speaking to DW.
Thank you. Thank you indeed.